Welcome back, Magma Munchers. It's your favorite marketable plushie, Magma. If you're like me, you've probably spent a lot of time on this gear builder website. Now, I've managed to cook up 5 of the best builds you can currently make, including variations for each of them. All of these builds have at most 1 insanity and don't have any sunken armor pieces. Also, every single one of these builds will be linked in the description, so you can check them out and modify them to your liking. With that all said, let's move on to the first build, which is a high agility, higher attack speed build. This build is perfect for slow magics like magma, earth and metal, which have a high attack size multiplier, meaning you can get away with barely any attack size. If you mostly use the musket, flintlock or bows, then you might also want to consider this build. The high attack speed removes a lot of cast time and end lag on slow magics and makes projectiles much faster. The high agility also lets you move around quicker, letting you gap close on your targets much more easily. Here's a variation of the build that uses the frozen modifier instead for those of you who don't want to grind for blasted items, and trust me, it is one tedious grind. The next build is an above 200 agility build. For those of you who don't know, having agility above 200 will make your T-jump and dodge reflex become a teleport, unless you're using a heavy dodge reflex like magic barriers. For all of you speed demons, this build is definitely for you. It has a really good amount of power and defense for a high agility build. If you'd like around 200 more defense coming at the cost of 50 attack speed, then check out this variation of the build. Or if you want more attack speed coming at the cost of less power, then check out this variation of the build. Remember that all of these builds will be linked in the description, so you can customize them exactly to your liking. Up next, we have a high power and defense build. If you only care about power and defense and not so much about the other stats, then definitely check out this build. With the new modifiers, you can have above 100 power and 1000 defense, which is crazy, but this obviously comes at the cost of having basically no other substats. This variation of the build uses a defense amulet, but if you'd like to use a power amulet, then check out this variation of the build. If you don't want to use an amulet in favor of having those 2 extra jewels for the jewel substats, then check out this build using the Chernix folds. Without Atlantean Essence you'd only have 90 power, but with Atlantean Essence you'll have 102 power. Next up is an all-rounder build having a good power and defense ratio and 100 of each stat except for intensity. I personally use a variation of this build as I make a lot of slots and I can't be bothered to make a new build for each one, so I just transfer this build between them. If you're fine with having 1 insanity, then use this variation of the build. I highly recommend you go with this Insanity 1 variation as you get around 50 more HP, which is enough to bring you above the 1600 HP mark. Finally, we have a Dark Sea build. I would recommend you just go for one of the previous builds and swap pieces out for Theurgist pieces when you're in the Dark Sea on an as-need basis. But if you want a dedicated Dark Sea build, then this is what you should go for. In the Dark Sea, the most important stats in order are defense, warding, power, and agility. This build gives a good amount of each. This variation gives 6 warding. Here's a variation that gives 4 warding. And here's a variation that gives 2 warding. The less warding you have in your build, the more of the other stats you'll have. I personally only go as far as Insanity 1 in the Dark Sea, as it's pointless going any further unless you're memeing, so I'd recommend the 2 warding variant. But if you want a single Dark Sea build that works anywhere in the Dark Sea, then just go with the 6 warding variant. Alright, that's all of the builds. Now I'm gonna give 2 build making tips for those of you who want to customize these builds or just make your own builds. Firstly, since warding now clears the Atlantean modifier, meaning you can't have warding and Atlantean essence on a single item, it's now just not worth it to incorporate warding into your builds. You'll just be losing more stats than you gain. Secondly, Make sure to maximize the amount of modifiers you have in your builds. Modifiers give bonus stats, so an armor piece with a modifier is simply better than a piece without one. If you're gonna use an armor piece that can't have a modifier on it, like a boss drop or a sunken treasure, then consider putting an Atlantean essence on it to maximize the amount of modifiers you have. Only go as high as 3 insanity though, as any higher will kill you. Alright, that's all for this vid. Every single one of these builds will be linked in the description so you can check them out. Have a wonderful rest of your day, my fellow magma munchers. Like and subscribe.
그랬냐?